Attention. Nice to see everybody. Great to see so many people on Friday afternoon. I was really worried we might have hardly anybody here. This is a beautiful sized audience for particularly what we want to do a bit later. We want to get you involved in some creative mapping. I don't know if anybody saw the big map of Cornwall out there. We're going to contribute to that at some point. I'm going to let Jane just welcome everybody, and then I'll say a couple of words about what we're up to today.
Great. So thanks, Claire. It's lovely to be here, to see you all here today. I'm Jane Wills, Director of the ESI, this building, Environment Sustainability Institute. Some of you I don't know, so very special welcome to you. I'm in charge until 1st of September, and Camille, then our new director, is actually sitting at the back, so hello, and hopefully you will all get the chance to meet her too. We're really excited to be supporting this event because it's a joint ESI HAS Cornwall event that is part of our celebration of 10 years of the Environment Sustainability Institute. We've had a series of events, and you can see more on our website. There's a page on the final tab of our website called ESI at 10. You can see what we've been doing. We've recorded everything, it's all up there. And there are 2 more events in the programme before the end of the academic year. One next week on pathogen emergence. They are a very diverse group of events. Pathogen emergence, which is organised with our colleagues in the Centre for Ecology and Conservation. That's an international symposium. There's about 50 academics coming for a 2-day workshop. It'll be really exciting. And then our last event on the 30th of June, organised by colleagues in my department, which is the Department of Earth and Environmental Science, and that's on the future of mining in Cornwall. Lots of people will be signed up, so you're very welcome to sign up for that. We've got a very active Twitter page, or feed, I should say, organised by our region, who's just walked in. You can always find out what we're doing by following that, or we have a newsletter that you can sign up for as well. So if you go to that final tab, ESI at 10, you can sign up there. So before I hand back to Claire for today, housekeeping things, the exits are pretty obvious, and the toilets are down by the exit, so on the first floor corridor here. I think we are recording today to put on our website, so if anyone's concerned about that, please have a word with Amrita or me. And special welcome to Daksha, who's going to be featured today, and have a great workshop.
Thank you. So it's really exciting because I've been working at the ESI for 10 years, but for the last year I've been head of Humanities and Social Sciences. And so our department was born at just around the same time the ESI became 10, and it feels really special to be thinking about ways to bring humanities and social sciences into the ESI. And we thought long and hard about where our strengths lie in our department. We did like a mapping exercise of all the kinds of research that we do, and we decided that one of our research clusters was around environmental justice, because we have people working in environmental law, environmental politics, environmental heritage and history, and it just made loads of sense. So then when we started talking about environmental justice, we realised that even within HAS, people think it has a slightly different meaning from others. For me, environmental justice, the way I understood it when I first came to the table to talk about it, basically meant environmental justice movements, mainly those in indigenous communities where people are fighting for their very survival against extractivist industries. But for other people, it meant very different things, like making law in the courts, or justice for people in Cornwall over their communities or their heritage. And so we devised this set of activities, Daksha and I, to explore all of those different diverse voices and to see if we could work out what the contours of environmental justice are. And then also to try and bring that to everybody working across different disciplines so that we can have some sort of sense of how and why environmental justice matters, and also how we can build it into all of our environmental projects that we do, because people and justice matter in the future that we're going to create around the environment. So I'm going to hand over to Daksha now, who's going to tell us a little bit about her background and something about what we did. And then after that, we've got some videos. We're going to get you involved in one of our exercises. There's a big map of Cornwall out there for us to contribute to. Then we'll come back for evaluations. And then we have a couple of guest speakers and a panel discussion to end up with, followed by cream teas. So it's a very exciting event, and thanks to everybody for coming, and over to Daksha, who's been brilliant to work with. It's been great fun.
You want me to stand up or stay here? Yep.
Hi, so next slide, please. Hi, everyone. start by just giving you some context and showing you some of my earlier work that explores environmental themes, focusing on mapping. And then I'll describe the workshops that I did here with that are around with students and staff here at Penrhyn with Claire. So this print was for the Horniman Museum in London, and it's called Pani, which is the word for water in many South Asian languages. The commission brief was to respond to themes of water pollution in South Asia, and water crosses geographical, political and cultural boundaries, and as such is a highly contested resource. So here's a close-up of the print, which focuses upon the Sundarbans region in Bangladesh, an area significantly impacted by rising sea levels and water pollution. I initially started my research by looking at reports of sources of pollutants in the region, such as they were gas production plants, textile industries, agrochemicals and pathogens from untreated human waste. Next slide. I also looked at satellite maps and data maps representing species habitat, water salinity, and species distribution. As an artist, my approach is always to get an overview of the subject matter and to explore how my work can ask audiences to ask questions and to imagine. For the Horniman, large groups of school parties and families were a key audience. Slide. But water symbolises purification and plays an important role in rituals and acts of worship in South Asia. So human relationships with water are deeply connected also to a sense of identity there. So to represent these cultural influences, I manipulated the colours of a satellite map to reflect the traditional colours of local textiles. This was printed large scale upon canvas, and I then embroidered into it using traditional stitches. So by interweaving crafts traditions into the landscape, I wanted to suggest their interconnection and that the loss of flora and fauna is also the loss to the fabric of human culture. Next slide. I researched species at risk in the region and made drawings of them. These drawings were merged into the map so that you have to search to find them. They're literally disappearing from the landscape. And here you can see a drawing of the white rumped vulture in blue on the map. And there are some other drawings that I made. Next slide. In this section, you can see a muntjac goat in blue on the left and a common flameback bird in orange on the right, top right hand. Next slide. So those drawings became an activity for school children visiting the museum. So they were asked to find the drawings in the print and then given a chart with locations and names of the species alongside further information. So that was one of my thinking behind that, those drawings being incorporated into the print. The print was also accompanied by a group of terracotta pots, which were decorated with drawings of pollutants. Here are some of my test drawings. Next slide. The shapes of the pots, again, I researched traditional water-carrying pots from the region to carry water from the well. They were deliberately deformed and cracked to suggest the damage that pathogens and other pollutants can do to the human body. So the pots are standing in for the human body. Next slide. Here's a detail from another pot, which includes drawings of chemical symbols of heavy metals, also found in surface area in the region, as well as pathogens. Next slide. So this is a different work. This is a detail from an exhibition in Portugal where I had a residency in a remote mountainous area undergoing desertification as a result of climate change. At the start of the residency, I spent a lot of time walking in the mountains, following paths between tiny hamlets dotted along the region. Many were abandoned and the loss of people and a way of life was palpable. Next slide. One day, as I was looking at the maps I'd been using, I started making small pinpricks to mark the pathways that I had travelled along. I placed this on an OHP, an old school technology, and switched it on. And the little dots of light that were projected to me suggested the stars at night, the passing of time, and the loss of communities due to the process of desertification. Next slide. The light projections were accompanied by a large drawing that also referenced maps. So here I transcribed heights above sea level to create an image that suggests mountainscapes. They were painted with a very fine brush using slip, which is a mixture of clay and water. Over time, the clay converts back into a fine powder and falls off the surface of the paper because there was no binder used in the process. And thus it was mirroring the process of desertification. Next slide. And so finally, I'm now going to talk about the Creative Fellowship here and work with Claire exploring environmental justice. So the image above is of Jones, by Jones. He's a student from Tanzania, and it shows how the local canal is no longer providing enough water for crops. It was posted on Padlet as part of the Diverse Voices series of Zoom conversations, one of my first projects. Diverse Voices connected students and staff here in Penryn with their peers in Sri Lanka and Tanzania to explore what environmental justice means to them. And the underlying structure of all the conversations was to provide a space for everyone to have an equal voice, to listen to each other and be heard. Next slide. So this is another image. It's of agricultural workers in Sri Lanka and was taken by Anutarsi, a student at Jaffna University. During the Zooms, participants took turns to ask each other questions about the environment, and the questions were all suggested by them beforehand and posted on the chat so people could choose which one they wanted to ask each other. Next slide. These are some of the questions. Everyone had an opportunity to ask a question and to reply to one in different pairings across countries. The diversity of responses was astonishing and included thoughts about rethinking what economic advancement means, respecting different forms of knowledge as equally valid, food insecurity, disillusionment with green economies, and the role of law in ensuring that local people and knowledge is involved in key decisions. Next slide. This image is by Dinesh Kudutur. He saw fishing boats in the local harbour. He spoke passionately about the cultural relationships between nature and the local fishermen, whose identities are deeply connected to the sea. So before each Zoom, participants were asked to post an image that described something about their local environment as a way of introduction. It was a very simple method that worked brilliantly because people immediately started describing the impact of the environment upon their daily lives. Next slide. This image is from the second workshop aimed at staff, and it's called Wicked Patterns and Sticky Maps. It comprised of group activities where participants used text, colour, drawing and mapping to visually map patterns of ideas about environmental justice. It was an experiment to explore if visual thinking could help us to see more clearly the interconnections and contradictions across complex challenges. We had a really great mix of disciplines for the workshop, and the exercise really lent itself to different perspectives. And you can see some of the images on the wall behind you. Next slide. The first exercise, which is there, comprised of a series of coded oval shapes and questions such as what do we mean by environmental justice and what are deep and shallow approaches to environmental justice. Participants could add a word or a phrase in the colour code section. Slide. In the second exercise, which is at the back, we transcribed phrases from deep and shallow approaches onto the new pattern. And here participants were asked to add text about the benefits and challenges of the different approaches. It was all activities were followed by group discussions about the fracture points that emerged. Next slide. And the final exercise put everything in real life context. I had drawn a large map of a section of Cornwall and added a legend to represent some different communities living in the area, so you can see the footprints there. I also added some examples of what each community needed to thrive and the challenges they faced. So the red example there. Participants were then next asked to draw symbols of some different groups of humans living in Cornwall onto the map with text and to add it to the legend as they went along. Next slide. And after this, we divided into groups representing insects, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, birds, marine and coastal life, habitats and sites of pollution, etc. Each group was asked to research their theme using website links and to add new symbols and text onto the map. Next slide. Here are some examples of some symbols alongside natural objects that people could refer to. I was keen to bring the senses into the workshop and experimented with playing sounds of running water and birdsong whilst people were writing. However, some people found it distracting, so there's something we might sort of explore a bit further. Next slide. On reflection, the scale of the map could have focused on a smaller area to allow space for more detail. Inevitably, there was a degree of estimation involved when adding symbols. But the main aim was to bring the previous more abstract exercises into a real-life context, where the challenges and complexities of the different needs of different groups could be visualized in one specific place. And this would be interesting to take this further with different communities, such as fishing industries, mining industries in Cornwall. Next slide. And finally, a sneak preview of an artwork, a large pencil drawing I'll be making on site in the Exchanges building this week. This is a test drawing made in my studio in Manchester. I chose to work with pencil because carbon is central to the environmental crisis, to avoid using art materials that may be harmful to the environment. The drawing is both local and global. It is from a map of the locality, but the circular format suggests the global. Next slide. It's influenced by data maps of Cornwall as well as geographical maps. Maps have, of course, always been selective about what they represent. They reveal what they wish to show. They determine what is seen. There are always ideological assumptions implicit in maps and decisions about what to include and not to include by making tangible a very complex world. Next slide. This is a detail of the test drawing. The final work will change. And I was aiming to represent place from multiple perspectives, from human and non-human. So you can see some of the trace drawings on the right, where I have used kind of data about species distributions, sites of pollutions, etc., and human habitation. And by merging and superimposing different types of data maps upon geographical information, I want to ask, whose needs are met in the environment and who can thrive? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And after this session, Daksha's going to dash off back to the Exchange building to carry on with the artwork. And she said she doesn't mind if some of us go down there with our green teas and have a little look and see what she's doing. So thank you, Daksha. It's been hugely inspiring working with you. So now we're going to show you a couple of videos based on the work that we've done that just slightly bit more detail about what we did. We'll start with, which one is it? We'll start with the Diverse Voices workshop, where you can actually get to hear some of the young people talking. I hope the technology works. Amazing, look at that. Hi, I'm Claire Saunders. I'm the head of Humanities and Social Sciences at Cornwall. So we teamed up with artist Daksha Patel and we got a creative fellowship for her. And it was her idea for us to talk to young people about what environmental justice means to them, and to do that by getting them to think about something that matters to them in their own environment, to bring a picture of that and to talk about that and think through the justice implications.
The idea behind this series of Zooms, which are called Diverse Voices, is to explore what environmental justice means to different people in different countries. There is space for sharing your thoughts, feelings, and lived experiences with each other about the issues and challenges facing your local communities, your local species and ecosystems. And they explore the impact of having a voice, being heard, and listening to others. Conversations between students from different countries are critical to environmental justice because you are the generation who may find solutions to the environmental crises that the older generation have played a part in creating?
This is photo I took in Canada on a like a wildlife watching boat. It made me think about how we make decisions about what to do with the environment or kind of work or activities that take place somewhere are obviously going to be affected by whether we see ourselves as part of this system or as observers.
So this picture is explaining that how the people are using the sea for their survival. All the people are sitting near the seaside and talking about the politics, environment, and culture, and they are spending time with the water, and their lives depend on water.
This is me in mountain hiking in the Lake District. And you can see on my back is my son, Torin. And the reason I wanted to show this image was because it's important for us, for Torin to learn and enjoy being outside in the open environment and to understand and have a real affiliation and connection with nature.
The problem with environmental justice started because we think, me and you, there is environmental injustice. And in this manner, injustice means there is inequities in terms of how people are being involved in themselves and into this matters relating to development or implementation and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Some of those who their voices, because of being disproportionately impacted by these negative consequences of environmental justice, their voices are always mute.
So my imagined relationship with nature is very emotional, kind of humble. And I would say my real relationship to nature is quite functional now.
So if we're able to understand that taking care of the environment so that the environment can take care of us is an army for all of requires a whole group of people acting together in one army, we're able to go and be great ambassadors to the society, to educate them, to make them understand, but also to be the forefighters, to be in front towards promoting and finally achieving environmental justice.
What I observed about environmental injustice happened around the state would take the decision around their own either state interests, national security interests, or economic development interests without listening to what the people who live in that area or environment think about that environment or how they use that environment.
The importance of recognizing kind of all the different forms of knowledge that different people have, and how the way you get no one to be opposed is to have everyone present.
In developing countries, we produce raw materials. So these Western countries, some of the raw materials are taken in our countries, but they go back in terms of commodities, they manufacture, the produce of the industries. For example, clothes, cars, and other things.
Each and every ecosystem has its own balance. Our activities, the activities of human beings are somehow meddling with that balance, and we are disturbing the balance. Because of that, some species are vanishing from the environment, whereas some species are growing at a rapid speed. So that is disturbing the balance of the nature. Is there a limit for growth? Should we slow down the nature of the growth?
I think the major role of the environment justice is starting from the students. As we from sub-Saharan countries, we depend much on rain for our daily activities like agriculture, watering plants, for cooking, for doing everything, and the water is life. So no rain, no good infrastructure that support daily activities to maybe to have wealth at home?
I think education is really important. If you're thinking a year ahead, sow a seed. If you're thinking 10 years ahead, plant a tree. And if you're thinking 100 years ahead, educate the people.
Thank you everyone really for your input. It's been very kind of thoughtful. We've had some deep conversations and some very, very complex issues.
So what have we learned from this? We've learned that people think about the environment in different ways. We've also learned that context really matters. What we're going to do after this is have a think about environmental justice some more, using this as a starting point and thinking about creative ways of understanding environmental justice in even more depth, in ways that are inclusive for communities, for ecosystems, for species and for Earth's processes. Oh, that came out all right. I've watched that now 950,000 times. With like 3 hours of footage condensed into 7 minutes. I felt like crying watching that. It's so sweet. There's one other little video as well, and then we'll get you drawing. Is it that one? No.
I think it is that one.
That one. Okay, so we're going to wake you all up and relocate into the interactive space where the big map is, and Daksha will talk you through how to contribute to the mapping exercise. Thank you. Just leave it out there. Yeah, whenever it's finished, it should have it on there. I'll let you take that. How about the right time of year? Saskia, We're just going to go and draw for 40 minutes and then we'll be back. Is that okay? We can't really move you with us, unfortunately. I don't know if you can hear me.
Absolutely fine. Yeah, no worries. So you'll be back in 40 minutes, you said?
Yeah, we should be back at 22, yeah, approximately.
Perfect.
And all right.
And enjoy it.
All right.
Bye.
From home? Okay. Are you able to see it all okay? Okay.
I'm not very fond of so yeah, maybe yeah, really fun job. Yeah.
Just leave our bags in here.
I left my bags there, actually.
Are you also heading to go to the map? Are also gonna go to?
Where have they gone?
I think they're there's a table.
All right.
I think a table. Oh, we only need, it's only Debs, Tiago and Kasaska's online. So 3.
So I could definitely do these two. And then,
Coming across all right so far.
yeah, no, it's good. I sort of popped into the office and I could hear it from Annie's had it on
Oh, right, I see.
machine. I was like, ooh, watching some of the slides. Maybe like that? Would that be?
Yeah.
I can always push back a bit further.
No,
If it,
that's fine, that's nice.
yeah, it's not
Put
too.
this chair over at the back in the corner.
Yeah.
Oh, it's good, isn't it? So glad. Decent turn now. It's all right there, isn't it? Yeah. Might.
Put my right specs on. I'm not
I couldn't see either. I can't see. It's too small.
Okay.
Which means respect.
Yes, I know what that is. Food. We had a few lot reading another meeting. I've been busy all morning. Yeah, so, are you all right? Yeah, no, thank you for asking. No, I'm fine. I'm going to go and do this. I'm just trying to work out an exit strategy so us human geographers can join in the task. Yeah, really is.
Okay. No.
This table here.
Right over here in the front.
That's perfect. Okay.
Here.
Things falling off the wall.
Your post has come down, it looks like.
Yeah.
Grab your tea.
Work's done, really, I suppose.
I think the chairs have changed. It was confusing.
If you fancy doing this and giving it back to the at the end, if you're doing this, don't think I've got enough. I don't have one that gives that with like feedback questionnaires. So you've done one, haven't you? Yeah, it's fine. As long as, if you show them, you say that they're from Daksha Patel and Claire Saunders Environmental Justice Workshop. Don't mind doing that one of those. Need to hurry everybody up.
Something about new and challenging. Julie drew a very beautiful basking shark.
I saw that, lovely.
A baby one, because it's small compared to the blue shark. And then I put a.
Oh. I don't think I've ever seen that. Or maybe I have.
Well, I didn't know it was sort of disappearing fast and it's. I don't ask if this is one, I don't know, but I also don't know.
That's really famous.
Oh, really? Oh dear. We have one then.
Jane, would you like a questionnaire? We're going to run out of these, but I just did like first come, first serve. We run out now. Is this everybody?
I don't have any notes. Other than permanent post.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Saskia, are you still there? Have you rejoined?
I am here, yeah.
Right, okay, so I think we're just about ready. There's just a couple of people engaged in an in-depth discussion in the creative space, which is fantastic, because that's what this is all about, sparking new conversations and people motivated to think about the environment in fresh new ways. So I'm just going to give a brief evaluation of this door of the workshops that we've engaged in. And then we're going to hear from our two guest speakers. And then after that, we've got Tiago, Debs, and our two guest speakers on a panel. And the audience can ask all of us questions, Daksha and I as well. Okay? So thank you. I hope you enjoyed the drawing. It's a nice little break and makes everybody wake up a bit. Makes some people feel really awkward, and it's nice to be just back in the room listening instead and being passive. I understand. Okay, so the key questions I'm going to talk about now are these three. The first one, what did we learn from doing this work about the contours of environmental justice? What is it? How do we explain such a complex thing that's understood in different ways by different people? Secondly, how useful are these creative methods for understanding environmental justice? And then thirdly, well, we've done this exercise, great. What do we do with it next? How do we build on it? And how do we make it something that's really useful for people, for communities, and for researchers within the ESI and CAS Cornwall? So this is just to sort of did a kind of thematic analysis on, so that one of them's fallen down, but the two oval shapes that were on the board. In the first oval, people were asked to have a think about what the meaning of environment is. In the second oval, they were asked to think about what justice means in relation to the environment. Then the third one was about treating people, ecosystems, species and Earth's processes through a justice framework. And then the final one was thinking about deep or shallow approaches to environmental justice, where the shallow ones are things that kind of like tinker around the edges, and the deep things are meaningful things that could make a massive change. So the first question then was on the meaning of the environment, and the things I teased out there are listed there. So Mother Earth was one of them, and Gaia was mentioned. So basically seeing the Earth or the environment as a living set of processes that help sustain itself. Scale was there, so I've been a little picture of some scales there, because some people were thinking about the environment on a microscopic scale, and some people were thinking about it on a macro scale. So that whole continuum of scales really matters. Some people think about it in terms of their country or their town. Some people think about it in terms of a microscope. Some people think about it in terms of the entire globe. And then balance was quite often mentioned, about the need for people to be balanced with their natural environment. Change was often mentioned as well, because the environment isn't something that's static, it's dynamic, and it's a set of processes. Species were often mentioned. I think there was some attempt to try to decenter humans from this and make sure that other species were seen as being important when we think about the environment as well. Mother Earth, and somebody also mentioned the Anthropocene. So you see, I've tried to find a picture that fits each of those main themes around the meaning of the environment. So it means lots of different things, basically, just like the environment was interpreted in different ways by the young people in the Diverse Voices workshop, so it was in these mapping workshops as well. And then the meaning of justice. Actually, there was lots of P's here. Now, what does justice mean? And people were referring to it in terms of people, in terms of power, policies and laws, and in terms of processes, both human processes and broader environmental processes as well. So in regards to people, Indigenous communities were mentioned quite frequently, how we have to treat them with justice, and how rich countries that have made lots of money out of exploiting poor countries need to basically make up for having done so. There was some talk of LGBT, workers, so that's some people down the coal mine, and obviously future generations as well. Intergenerational justice was seen as important. And then power policies and laws, some stuff around looking after people, protesting, conventions, and actual laws and policies. That's also another meaning of justice. And then processes around sharing, around dialogue, and around the complex webs of life that we have in the world. And then I think, so then are sort of three key things, but then I think running through a lot of that, we were saying words like redress, restore, rebalance, decolonise, and democratise. And actually these themes are also coming through from the Diverse Voices workshop. We saw the video on as well. The next one I wanted to show you was the challenge around deep versus shallow approaches. I don't know if anybody had the chance to look at the board on the back, but basically, that's it behind me. I've just taken an example of 4 of those circles from the deep and 4 of them from the shallow. And you can now turn around and look at the screen instead of at the back. So we populated this from the outer circle of the ovals. And the deep approaches are at the top in green, being transparent, decolonising, adaptive law, and challenging the system. The shallow approaches are at the bottom, techno-optimism, fortress conservation, treating the economy as equal to society and the environment when it's a man-made concept, and electric cars are seen as shallow things that won't fundamentally fix stuff. And then what we asked people to do was to write at the top of the circle, to write something there that was positive about that approach to environmental justice, and underneath to write something about the challenges. And what we saw here was a really clear picture that we debated in some depth. And I think most of the people at the workshop liked the idea of the green circles, which are very principled. But when it came to it, we were looking at it and thinking, actually, that's really, really, really tricky to put that into practice. And that made some of us reevaluate, these might be shallow approaches at the bottom, but at least they do something and we're able to implement them. And this is an ongoing challenge in environmental politics between the pragmatist and the principled approach. And one of our respondents summarised it really nicely in their questionnaire, where they said, it shows it's easy to criticise actions, but not come up with justice solutions that are accessible. So we can be really critical, but then come up with absolutely nothing. So maybe the small scale approaches, they join up incrementally into something bigger over time. I don't know, I've never been able to get my head around it because I'm quite principled. Okay, and then we asked people afterwards, they filled out the questionnaire that some of you have got that I hope you'll be completing and giving back to me, because I'd like to be able to write something about this exercise and try and get it published. We asked people what they thought about using creative methods in order to explore environmental justice. I've mainly put the positive stuff on the slide. There are also comments about how it would have been nice to have more people in the room. We were quite a small group in the end that did it the other day. It was nice to see more people contributing to the map. So I think what you get out of it is broadly equivalent to what gets put into it in terms of the people in the room in the first place. And then also it was suggested that we probably should have briefed people on what to expect on coming so that they had some ideas on how to populate these ovals and circles before they got into the room. But mostly people were saying it was a very enjoyable experience that enabled them to think in more holistic ways, to join up dots and see the bigger picture. That it was also a really useful way to talk about and understand one another's ideas. So if somebody was talking about how they were drawing something, and then they felt that they had to explain it to somebody, and then that person was able to explain it back because the picture really meant something more than just a conversation would on its own. Creativity and moving around, somebody said, was really good for helping them think. It also allowed connections across disciplines, and somebody said they were really surprised that they had quite a strong emotional reaction to the activities that we were engaged in, which I think is probably a good thing, because to feel connected to the environment, we have to feel it through our own emotions. And then I just put in this little quote here. What do you think are the benefits of interactive creative workshops like wicked patterns and sticky maps? that use drawing, colour, patterns and movement, thinking on your feet to explore environmental justice. And somebody put there, everyone around a table creating something together is a powerful thing. And I like that idea. There's real power in this symbolism that we create together. Probably more so in some ways than, you know, a few words on a page or a talk. There's something there that you can see that holds that power forever. So, I think, well, where next? So you'll have seen from the map itself, we need to do a bit more work about thinking about who the audiences are who the contributors are to the map, because like I said before, what you put in is equivalent to what you get out. So we haven't had enough ecologists in the room to really map out the species as beautifully as we'd like. With what we've ended up with is a very general impression, but I think it still shows all of the entanglements involved in trying to give species, people, habitats and earth processes justice. So it's a starting point for working through and resolving these complexities. And Daksha and I have started talking about maybe doing more of these workshops to target these workshops with specific communities and specific stakeholders. And there's plenty of those around all of the issues facing us in Cornwall around lithium, offshore wind, the housing crisis, sewage pollution in our waters, biodiversity protection and tourism, just to name some of the most obvious ones that have popped up on the map. And you know, the other thing that we would like to do really, I think, is to see if there are ways to embed this work that we've started into other significant grant applications on the environment, because everything we do has a justice implication on someone or something somewhere, and these creative mapping activities really help us to think that through. So I think that's it from me, apart from our motto, justice for people, species, living systems and earth processes. Not much to ask for. Quite impossible to do, actually, in equal measure, to give justice to all of those things, but it's a lovely aspiration to hold. There's me being principled again. So now I am ahead of schedule, which is fantastic, and I'm going to pass over to Cliff, who's going to give his talk. Okay, well, do you want?
Yeah. That's fine.
And then we'll worry about the technology of getting us in. Do you want me to open it?
Yes,
which
please.
one?
Yeah.
You can do it yourself, can't
Yeah.
you? Okay. Sorry, you tell everybody the university you're from, because my memory is like a sieve.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great, it's really good singing.
Okay, so thank you for having me. Listening to that, I realized how far behind the people I'm working with are in terms of the justice journey. So a little bit quickly, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's really kind of you. And it's nice to be in a space where people speak to environmental justice in this way. I don't actually come from places where they quite do the same thing. So I come from Australia. It's a white settler society. And that sort of has framed my attitude and what I have to undo. And then I realized I'm sort of not alone in that task. So I started doing work with a lot of men, particularly ex-mining workers, people who work in different industries which have been extractive and damaging in many ways, and also men who have been very reactionary against this sort of environmental justice. They want no part of it in many regards. And at first I sort of wondered why that is. What is the resistance? And it's because I had to sort of dig a little bit deeper with them. And so initially I took a sort of social science approach to this. I sort of come out of cultural studies. I sort of used some fictional writing. And then I was doing interviews and focus groups, and these were falling over pretty flat, to be perfectly fair. You get a certain sort of data that it wasn't doing anything for the participants in many regards. We'd have a bit of a conversation, and then I go away and write it up, and I'm saying, something's not traveling here. It's not embedding. So one of the things I realized there was sort of quite angry responses to this research process, and there was a lot of shame amongst the men. And so I realized that we had to work through a sort of productive version of shame. Shame you can use as pathologizing and limit activity and individuate it. But you're talking about communities, mining communities, that they'd lost their minds. You're talking about communities of sort of coastal recreation unit users where pollution was effectively their ecology. It was not something that was added to their ecology. That's all they have known. And then to sort of challenge that and try and take that away from them in ways that are sort of imposed upon them rather than involving them, they didn't know how to take that. So they had to work through that. So, and I also had to work through these sorts of issues as well. So I moved to sort of arts-based research methods. And that's why I'm quite inspired by Daksha's work. It's pretty incredible work. Like when you see it in terms of, maybe you're more familiar with it here at this institute, but in many regards, some of the universities and some of the grant bodies are just coming around to this really and taking it seriously. So one of the first projects I did, we started doing performance art with men. It was about their relationship through wetsuits to Cancer Alley in Louisiana, where the chloroprene is made for the neoprene. And we wanted to think through that. They didn't want to think through that. So I had to sort of take myself out of my own comfort zone. And so I worked with oil, as you can see in this picture, and did performance with oil. The oil damaged my skin. Then we'd have conversations about the relationship between male bodies, those who had worked in the oil industry, the effects on other bodies, and how those bodies in shadow, what Val Plumwood calls shadow places, those places in the front line of capitalist extraction and violence, would be dealing with that, but we don't see that. We're here making money with our jobs, etc. So we did that, and that was sort of successful. And then, so that's what arts-based research did for us. It sort of started taking us back into our bodies in a way that they haven't really tried out before. Like, it was really outside of comfort zones here. So that started to grow, and we've been writing a play about this, where we're going to do the play. But then I moved from that, and I said, okay, we need to reading environmental justice work and ecofeminist work, etc. I said, okay, I'm still coming from a pretty binary masculine logic here in terms of our relationship with the environment and with the non-humans. And the man was continuing to come up with quite socio-technical solutions, these approaches that you've been speaking about here. And so we started thinking about, okay, what now? So fortunately, there was a Swedish team doing work on just transitions in Sweden. And we've got an oil refinery in Premraff, which is in a place called Lysekil. We've got Gotland, which has a cement factory, and we have a steel factory up in Luleå in the far north. And so I started working with these communities. And one of the things that we did was, we went for walks and we did some drawing. We took photographs. And then one of the things, I'm very much a water person. I spent most of my life in the water. And then I said, let's go into the sea. So we started to conduct what we call a sort of wet ethnography. So we paddled out into the sea, and we took canoes out. We paddleboarded out into the sea. I did some audio recordings. We did some hydrophone recordings to hear the sounds of what the refinery was making under the water, so they could get a sensibility of what that's doing to the creatures and the non-humans around that space, because there'd been a rapid decline in the lobster population. And then I went back at a time later when the refinery they have to do a sort of full overhaul. It happens every few years, and they shut it down. They hate shutting it down. It makes so much money. So they hate shutting it down. They shut it down, And so for a while it was quiet. And this went on for about 3-4 weeks, I think. So we did a paddle out and we did the hydrophone recordings then. And then we went snorkeling and we started to notice a few lobsters. So the lobsters had come out and said something to them. And one of the guys was really interested. He was quite emotionally moved. He knew the lobsters were there. He's lived in Leicestershire all his life. He knew they were there. And then he said, I want to make something about the lobsters because obviously they're hypersensitive to the noise and the sound and the vibrations of the refinery. And he said, that's my job. And I said, what do you mean this is your job? And he goes, oh, my job in the refinery is to walk around and I have to, because the machinery, you've got the gas monitors. He says, but they're not fail-safe. So he has to use his human senses and he has to use his hearing to listen to the bearings to tell whether the machinery is working safely or not, what damage it might be doing to the other people in the refinery. He says, oh, the lobster's doing the same. And I went, oh, and so he developed this really interesting relationship with the lobster. So now we've got an upcoming exhibition in this town, and so we're co-making a light projection of the lobster to take up the town. So, and this is all participatory work, so they're involved in making the artwork. So then I travelled up to a place in Exeter where the cement factory is, and I met another guy there. And he was retired, and he said to us, he said to me, oh, come and look at the little museum I've done. It's like an amateur, voluntary museum. And we went up there and we walked in, and he said, I want to sort of show you around. And then we were walking around, and it was just all the workers were men. There was no record of women in this community in this place. And so we walked out, and I had a big banner, a drop sheet on the ground. I said, start drawing the town. Start drawing the village, your relationship to the cement plant. And he started doing that. And then a lady who he sort of knew, she stopped by, and she's 92, about 92. And she lived in the village all her life. And she said, oh, you're doing it wrong. And he went, oh, what do you mean you're doing it wrong? And so she said, oh, I'll go get my friend. So the next day they came back and they said, we have to go around and listen to the village. So we had this really powerful thing whereby it wasn't just about what we were seeing. There was an audible rumble that always was present in the village. They'd grown up always having this rumble in the village. And so we started making these recordings, and we walked around in the sounds that they wanted, and then they wanted to dance. Now, I don't dance. I've never danced in my life. And I said, oh, and they said, we want to dance our response to this. And he said, I'm not dancing. This is not what I'm going to do. And I said, come on. And he goes, okay, no. He said, I'll draw on the thing what I was going to draw on the canvas. And so we had this impromptu dance choreography to the soundtrack that we were playing. So this is sort of this evolution of this. This is what creative methods do. They take you into places that you didn't even know you could go and build relationships you didn't even know you could have. And they promote a sort of reflexivity, which was really productive. And we weren't out there to find data. That's the crucial thing. We were creating data. Okay, so I filmed, this is the place, this is cement factory. They're running out of water. And the old lady, there's one tree which is still there, and the factory when it was smaller used to be the tree was just on the edge of it. Now the factory's going around it. The tree is a spindly tree now. It still survives like her. So she wanted to tell the story of that through a dance. So I'm going to quickly show you the animation I made in response to this. So this is not something that I used to do. This is all very new to me, but what I've been learning from in terms of using creative methods is that often when you talk to other disciplines, they want to use them to just simply communicate. They want to communicate their engineering solutions. They want to communicate, for example, what a just transition, might look like for the jobs for the community. And then, as Anna Hickey-Moody said, arts-based methods are somewhat activist. They're about an affective pedagogy. It's about learning together during research. And people will often say to me, well, what's going to be the output? And I'll have to say, I have no idea where we're going to get with this, who's going to come into the conversation, or what challenges or problems or solutions that they want to raise. There's an open-endedness to it, which I think is very, very difficult to make work in institutional settings, in grant funding body settings. In dealing with, this is when you're talking about engagement, who are we engaging? Like, yes, some audiences are very open to this. Some audiences want nothing to do with it, or they think it's cutesy and fun, and then they want to just get onto the serious business. And so that becomes the challenge. How do we take this into spaces back to the communities and let them push to bring them in so they can push back against the industry, for example, right? Like to have that guy develop that relationship between the lobster and him being on the union, being a union member and being within that setting and understanding that just transitions are not about just getting jobs anymore. They're about the relationship with the lobsters in that area. I feel like that's going to have more of an impact and travel further and resonate further and have an effective pedagogy than if I had written a white paper that I could have submitted and somebody would have said, big tick, line on the CV or something along those lines, or you've done that, it gets shelved. You're sitting in people's bodies. They don't forget as easily. So, and that's why I think institutes like this, I'm a little bit jealous, to be fair, to have such a space where this is free to do is very uncommon. You may think it's common when you're in the midst of it, but increasingly I don't find that yet, particularly across different cultures. And this, when I go back to Australia, travels less well. Yeah, there's a certain carbon masculinities working there, which are still solid, right? It's unsettling. Some of these places, other places, you can see fractures. You can see ecological masculinity sort of at work a bit. In some other places, it's the steel workers are still steel, to put it in a very simple way. So yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I like that term.
Yeah.
Oh, that looks great, what you can see. You can see the audience really clearly, Saskia. That's brilliant.
I'm trying to share my screen. I'm not used to a team, so I'm not sure how it works. Seems to be. Can you? Is it working? So you've got it?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. See if I can make it bigger. Or do you see it as a full screen at your side?
No, but I think is it big enough at the back? Yes. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, all right. Okay. Yeah, yeah, thanks very much, Claire, for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be part of this. And yeah, I apologize that I can't be in the room itself, but I've been battling with whatever it is, a cold or a flu or COVID, although I keep testing negative, but for 2 weeks I've not been feeling very well, and traveling from Lancaster to Cornwall was a little bit too much. So yeah, our brief was quite open-ended how we were going to respond to the project, and Claire sent us some materials, and I've picked up some of the stuff that was shared in the materials that Claire shared, but also picking up on some of the things that were discussed this afternoon. And maybe it's useful to say a little bit about my background as well, because we're all coming from very different disciplines and have our own sort of journey into creative practice. So I've been working as a legal anthropologist for 20 years in Southern Africa. I work with what were formerly hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari Desert. Working on all sorts of issues around land rights, cultural heritage, and indigenous people's rights in general. And that's how I got into environmental justice as well. Originally, I've been mainly working as a ethnographer, doing lots of field work. But for the last, about 6 years, I started to engage much more with creative practices. And it's interesting, the previous speaker sort of saying that how difficult it is in Australia. I actually, by working with Indigenous peoples and seeing how some of their paintings and their art practices are being used in court cases around ancestral land right claims, has been very inspirational for me to think about law in a different way. Because I work with Indigenous peoples, their understanding of law is much more performative. It's much more about a living law, and it's not something that you can find that is codified, that you can find in a constitution or statutes, etc. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from. So when Claire asked me to respond a bit onto the project, I started to look around. I wanted to see more kind of other arts practices, and did a bit of looking around on what's been done around environmental justice and arts. And just here on the first slide, I've got some really interesting links here to projects where, and particularly kind of response to what Claire was presenting about these really grand kind of challenges and the deep meaning of what environmental justice means, these ideas around decolonization, transgressive laws, these really big kind of challenges that we may feel quite difficult to achieve, maybe as a political scientist or as a lawyer in my case. But I think this is where creative methods, creative practices actually really come to the fore. And this special issue that I'm referring to here is a really interesting proposition. It talks about environmental justice and arts practices and a whole range of really very interesting artists, some doing very similar work as Daksha, but across very different kind of media that they do work. And what I found really very interesting, if I started to dig a bit further into environmental justice and arts, is that they all actually do talk about these really big kind of challenges and these deep values around decolonization, and in their arts practice really making these interesting links between, sort of linking that to what Claire was saying about skill, and also the very long kind of time dimension. So a lot of environmental justice art making links, talking about water and crossings and migration, but with the transatlantic slave trade, and some really very provocative pieces of art that I would really recommend for the project to engage with. And I've just highlighted sort of 4 instances where I think I've sort of been focusing more about what could be next for the project and for all of us working on environmental justice and art. So, and one artist that her work I thought was really very interesting, and based on the materials that Claire was sharing, I was kind of thinking, how can you take this further? How can you reach maybe other audiences and in a different way? And Aisha Hamid, I find her work really very interesting. She has different kind of words for it, videography, or he also calls it PowerPoint cinema. but she's using all different kind of material and sort of brings it together. And it's film, it's poetry, it's interesting theoretical work, and she's also been very much influenced by sound of techno music and techno duo Drexia of the 80s and 90s. And she brings it really together in a very interesting installation art piece that she performs when she brings her work. And I think for me, it really resonated to all the bits and pieces that I've seen of this project, the videos, the testimonials of the people that were expressing, the students, etc., what they thought what environmental justice was, also the drawings. Of course, Daksha's work really speaks to that as well. So I thought it was kind of inspirational how these things can be brought together in a very kind of, more of an emotive way and presenting our work around environmental justice and art in a much more performative way. Obviously, mapping seems to be really at the heart of this project as well. And I've been involved in quite a lot of mapping projects around Indigenous peoples' land rights. And I've been working with anthropologists on a project around mapping the unmappable, because if you work with Indigenous ontologies, you work with the spirits, with the ancestors, with things that are in a Western Cartesian cartography, are things that are really impossible to map. So also, as lawyers, we often are very dependent on maps in court cases, but obviously we want to sort of do this counter mapping and use different types of mapping. And the work of Margaret Pearce is really very thought provocative. She is an artist. She used to be an academic in geography, cartographer, but it now works as an artist and has done lots of projects in North America around place naming and Indigenous mapping, and really works around this concept of how can we actually map the unmappable. And again, this piece that I'm showing here, and you can see it better if you follow the link, again, sort of really spoke to the bits and pieces that I saw from this project around with the post-it notes and the circles with the text, and what Margaret often shows in her work is this kind of journey and the journey you're on. And that mapping can be, many different kind of things. And so I thought, working further with all the post-it notes, all the interventions from the wider public, and make installations around different types of mapping could be a really interesting way forward for the project. Very quickly, a project that I'm doing myself around photography, so I think environmental justice and creative practices for me is also about de-learning, and having had the great fortune and the privilege of been working for 20 years with Indigenous peoples, I feel like it's been a lot of de-learning on my side to think differently about the law and how we've been indoctrinated in this kind of very positivist thinking about the law. And I think it's for a lot of our own disciplines. So I've been involved in a project with my PhD student, a photographer at Rhodes University, and I've been revisiting a lot of the fieldwork sites that I've worked with in the past, and through photography thinking differently about the law, and see how through photography we can present that living law and things that are really very difficult in my writing practice to convey, and particularly these different ontologies, when you go into trance through dancing, how you start to have these conversations with the spirits, with the ancestors. That's where the law happens for the Sun peoples, and that's so very difficult to bring that in a court of justice. And through the photographic practice, we've been able to show that living law in action. So we're having a big exhibition opening in 2 weeks in South Africa. But also to draw in, so I've also been very much interested in the work around photography and I've been working with the work of a Algerian, Jewish, Israeli theorist. And she writes about how photography can be a civil contract. And I'm very much interested in how we as viewers of photography, and particularly this kind of very emotive photography, how we all have a responsibility. So we have been making portraits of women and their birthplaces, but the whole idea is that that we create this kind of relationship and a responsibility and notions of solidarity around this very strong gaze of these women, and not sort of portraying the sun as this iconic hunter-gatherers. Usually they're portrayed with their bow and arrow and often sort of emphasizing their vulnerability. But we really want to return that and invert that gaze by showing the strength of these women. Ancestral land right claims often about the past, but we sort of really portraying it through this photography into the future, through these birth rituals and menstruation rituals. Also, objects are for me a source of law, the everyday practices of law. So when Indigenous peoples are trying to get their land rights, they often have to present them in a kind of frozen past. A lot of Indigenous peoples have lost that connection because they've not had access to the land, so they can't continue with their practices. So their law is also in everyday kind of rituals and practices, and everyday objects for me signify how they make laws in their everyday practices, and that we should be very careful not to over-essentialize in Indigenous laws. So I think, linking that to this project, I mean, we saw quite a lot of photography as well, and I think, and sort of responding to the previous comment, I fully agree that we should not see art as a kind of communicative device. But for me, working with the photographer and the photography, and we were not sure what was going to happen when we did the field work. But it suddenly, it got me thinking so completely differently about ancestral land right claims. And for many years, I've been interviewing the older generation, and suddenly things started to change completely by being in that conversation with a photographer. And it was a very collaborative project as well with the women. The creative practice was actually challenging my own practice as a lawyer, and now we can sort of share that with a wider audience. And then lastly, I just want to say a few things also about reaching wider audiences and what we can do with sort of arts, creative practices, and environmental justice. So I started to curate some of my work that I've been doing around space law, and now obviously I'm also curating the exhibition around the law of the land. And I went last year to a really interesting exhibition at the Tate, Liverpool, around trespassing and sort of radical landscapes. And obviously a lot of that, although it didn't really talk about environmental justice, but I think all the artworks for me were about environmental justice. And I think curating, and it would be interesting to see maybe for the next steps of the project, allows you to bring all these different parts together and weave them together through a form of storytelling. And one particular artwork, which was related to the Greenham Commons, really spoke to me so beautifully on all different kind of levels. It was about women protesting, and I think within environmental justice, the activism, the protest is, I think, super important. And they actually were already doing these peace camps in late 70s, 80s, up until I think 2000, around a common site that was being used by the US Air Force for nuclear arms. And obviously that spoke very much to me because I've been working for 20 years with Indigenous peoples and within the environmental justice movement, peace camps being really very important for Indigenous peoples in North America, Canada, etc. To sort of see that within the context of the UK really spoke very much to me. It also embroidery, tapestry, and I was really pleased to see Daksha's work and how she's also using stitches. Speaks to me as a creative practice as well. I love working with textiles, and in my curatorial practice, I use a lot of different textiles. So yeah, I think the curatorial practice and working with different media, tactile things like textiles could be really very interesting. And one final thing that I would want to say about this exhibition, and the catalogue is absolutely inspiring. I actually went there with my sister, who's much older than me, and she a lot of the stuff from the 60s, and sort of she remembers all these things, and it was also a little bit disheartening to see how many of these struggles, for how long they're here for us, and how much work there still needs to be done. But then on the other hand, there was so much kind of very transgressive kind of art that really showed how art can make a really big kind of difference. So there were really multiple layers that you can show in that curatorial practice. So that's where I'm going to leave my sort of thoughts for the future.
Thank you so much, Saskia, and thank you so much, Clifton. So I didn't announce them, but Saskia is a reader in law at Strathclyde, and Clifton is a senior lecturer in media and cultural studies at Newcastle. So I'm sorry I couldn't memorise that information. I'm rubbish, but I'm really pleased to have found two very inspiring speakers. We actually have an hour left on the agenda, and the idea was to have the panel discussion now and green teas, but the tea and coffee has been sat there for quite some time, and I'm worried it's getting cold. So I propose we grab a cream tea, and then if the people on the panel wouldn't feel too awkward to be drinking and munching cream teas at the same time, we kind of combine those two parts together. Yeah, so let's go for it. The food and drinks at the front, and I'm so sorry we can't transport one to you, Saskia, from online. So yeah, in just a couple of minutes when everybody's got their cream tea, we'll get you back in.
Well, the one time I got like singing service, a popsicle, I didn't have one with me now.
That was great, thank you.
Stuff as well. Nothing really I can say.
You're just highlighting the values. Yes. That's exciting.
Yeah, they go to weird places.
It looks like our other diagram's going to fall on.
Oh no. You're going to get a train?
I don't know. Where they would live. Not here. So yeah, that's good. I was going to say, I think you should you could circularize. Inspiring things. Yeah.
No, just, engaging.
Yeah.
Condemn them and then we.
Yeah.
So why? This is exactly one of those times where you really went ahead of
6 o'clock. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
That they call themselves the Sinopec, and they're ancient. Yes.
150 years.
Honestly, and because they have no concept over the land.
Very. Yeah, very damaged.
But they are bringing people here. Yes, but lots of yeah, like and right now they can. It's happy.
That was the hope.
So bad because like in Thailand.